Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand?
In this tutorial we're going to look at how to set up the eaReckon CM-Comp87 compressor plugin and use it in a number of real-world production scenarios to demonstrate how it works and what you can do with it. To demonstrate CM-Comp87, we've created a new session with a simple acoustic drum loop playing at 103 BPM. You can find this file and all the files for this demonstration in the tutorial files folder. Insert an instance of CM-Comp87 across the track, and immediately we can see the meters moving to indicate the input levels of the left and right channels and the overall combined output level after compression. You can actually turn these meters on and off by clicking on them. At the moment, the ratio is set to 1:1, so there's no change to the sound, nothing's being compressed. A quick flick of the bypass switch confirms this. The threshold control sets the volume level above which the signal will be compressed or reduced in volume. Why would you want to reduce the volume of your drums? Let's find out. Set the threshold at -18 dB. You can click on the parameter values and type them in if you want, rather than adjusting the knobs. And play the loop through the plugin. Notice how the yellow light flashes on the loud kick and snare hits, but doesn't flash when the quieter hi-hat hits happen. This is because at this setting, the kick and snare are loud enough to cross the threshold we set at -18 dB, but the hi-hats aren't. With the threshold now set, increase the ratio control slightly from 1:1 to 1.1:1. And notice how the red line on the gain reduction meter now moves whenever a kick or snare drum hits. The ratio control determines how much reduction is applied to the signals that cross the threshold. The higher the ratio, the more the volume is reduced. At the current setting, the effect is minimal, but the CM-Comp87's ratio control goes all the way up to 10:1, which is fairly extreme. You can also see that the output level meter is now about 1 to 2 dB lower than the input meter, which makes sense considering the amount shown by the gain reduction meter. Turn the ratio knob up further to around 4:1 and note the significant increase in gain reduction as shown on the meter. The overall level of the loop also gets noticeably quieter, as the compressor now reduces the level of the kick and snare more severely. The gain reduction meter is showing a reduction of around -8 dB for the kick and -4 dB for the snare at this setting. Now we get back to the original question of why we would want to make our drums quieter. Now that the compressor has reduced the levels of the loudest parts of the signal, only the parts that cross the threshold, we can raise the level of the whole thing back up so that volume-wise the loud parts sit where they were before, but the level of the quieter stuff, like the hi-hats and the drum ambience, is now much louder. This is achieved using the make-up control. Turn it up by the same amount as the maximum gain reduction shown on the meter, 8 dB in this case. Having the limiter switched in will ensure that the output never goes over 0 dB, but set the make-up control too high and the limiter will also have a squashing effect on the sound. The attack control governs the reaction time of the gain reduction circuit, that is, how quickly the signal's output level gets reduced once the compressor senses that the input threshold level has been exceeded. Set the attack time to around 30 milliseconds, and notice how the front of the kick and snare sounds harden up. This is because with the onset of the gain reduction now delayed by 30 milliseconds, the initial hit of the drums is slipping through unscathed to the point where almost no gain reduction is occurring. The loop just sounds louder because of the make-up setting. You can thereby use this control to effectively shape the volume contour of the drums and even enhance their attack. Conversely, the release control sets the time that it takes for the compressor to reset the signal's output volume back to normal once the level of the input signal falls back below the level set by the threshold control. Setting a fast release works well for drums because of the rapid spiky nature of the waveform. With the attack back at 0.5 milliseconds, turn the release control up to around 750 milliseconds and you can hear the smearing effect that it has, as sounds immediately following the kick are also suppressed in its aftermath as the output level returns to normal more slowly. Of course, compression can also be used as a creative effect. Commercial studios often have a mic in the ceiling of the live room called a listen mic. This usually has an extreme compressor strapped across it so that producers can hear what performers are saying in between takes. But some producers found that drums also sounded terrific running through the listen mic. You can recreate this effect with CM Comp 87 by applying the following settings. Threshold minus 34 dB, ratio 10:1, attack 0.5 milliseconds, release 50 milliseconds, makeup 23 dB, and dry and wet 100%, and the limiter switched in. This sounds great, but it's a little extreme. To obtain a more subtle parallel compression style effect, which means blending an uncompressed signal and a heavily compressed version together to increase detail without overly squashing the original, wind the dry-wet control back to around 7%. We're now hearing mainly the uncompressed loop with a hint of the squished version mixed in, so although our drums sound compressed, they still retain most of their original dynamics, as can be seen by the way the output level meter is moving around. CM Comp 87 copes just as well with electronic drum sounds. Check out this vintage electro style beat that we made with CM 505. The kick drums are all over the show velocity-wise, and the whole thing just sounds a bit lackluster. Time to sprinkle on a bit of CM Comp 87 magic. The input level is slightly low, as indicated by the input left and right meters. So the first thing to do is to boost the input level knob by about 2 dB to start with. Then we set the threshold at minus 12 dB, which is where it seems to want to flash the most. And set a reasonable ratio of around 6:1. A maximum indicated peak reduction of around minus 5 dB means that we can turn the makeup control up to 5 dB to compensate. Note that some kick drums are triggering gain reduction while others aren't, which means that the wayward loudness levels have been addressed and they all sound much closer together level-wise now. We leave the attack at its fastest setting so that the front edges of the louder kicks are caught and taken down as required. How about a vocal? Here we have a quiet phrase followed by a much louder phrase.
Take it on. Why don't you understand?
To help even out the levels between the two, we set the threshold so that the quiet vocal doesn't illuminate the yellow LED, but the louder one does. In this case, the best setting seems to be around minus 15 dB.
Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand?
The difference in level between the two phrases is quite pronounced, about 14 dB according to the input level meters. So to cure this, we dial in a fairly high for vocals, ratio of 6.5:1. We set a fast attack of around 5 milliseconds and a moderate release of about 350 milliseconds so that the gain reduction meter bounces smoothly following the volume contour of the vocal.
Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand?
At its peak, the meter is showing a gain reduction of around minus 10 dB,
Why don't you understand?
and the two vocal phrases sound much more evenly matched.
Why don't
We dial in
you
8 dB of makeup
understand?
to compensate for the drop in overall level caused by the compression.
Why don't you understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand? Take it on.
And if we then dial in a 60% dry-wet
Why don't you
balance,
understand? Take it on.
voila!
Why don't
Instant parallel
you
compression.
understand? Take it on. Why don't you understand?
Now let's try the compressor with an acoustic guitar recording. Import CM Comp 87 acoustic guitar.wav into an empty project and insert the compressor across it. It's a fairly fast rhythmic strumming part, and we're just aiming to tame the peaks a little and bring out more detail in the quieter strums. So we set the threshold at around minus 16 dB so that the indicator is flashing solid with the loudest drums. Increase the ratio to around 3:1 to get the gain reduction meter really moving. It's again showing a maximum indicated reduction of around 4 dB, so we dial up the makeup control to 4 dB to compensate, and pull the dry wet balance back to around 75% for a more subtle effect. The loudest peaks are now as loud as they were before, but the quieter drums are noticeably louder and the whole thing sounds punchier and brighter. This should make the parts much better in a full track. Finally, let's see how it reacts to something a bit more synthetic. Here we have a mad synth noise sampled from a Roland modular synth. It sounds pretty powerful on its own, but when played against our CM505 loop from earlier, it could do with taming so that it would sit better in a mix. So we strap an instance of CM-Comp87 across it and set the input level control to -2 dB, then set a threshold level of -14 dB. Looking at the waveform of the audio file, you can see that it has two distinct volume levels, so we need to compress this hard with a ratio of 9:1. As a result, you can actively see the compressor working to flatten out the levels by looking at the gain reduction meter. A makeup setting of around 5 dB completes the effect. And it now sits much better with the drums. It has enough impact still, but you can now make out the detail in the lower tones without the louder segments blowing your cones. For a bit of fun, let's put all of these things together except the guitar, which is at completely the wrong tempo, with the compressors turned off to see the difference.
Why don't you understand? Why don't you understand?
And with them on.
Take it on.